A strike that unfolded not over days, not over weeks, but in a matter of hours. Hours that changed the trajectory of this conflict. Hours that forced the White House into emergency session. Hours that demonstrated just how quickly the situation in Eastern Europe can escalate beyond anyone's control. What Russia did today crossed a line that President Biden and his administration had hoped would hold, and when that line broke, Ukraine did not hesitate. They responded with precision, ferocity, and a level of tactical coordination that has left military analysts around the world stunned. This is the story of what happened today. This is the story of what it means for the war. And this is the story of why Washington is now scrambling to figure out what comes next. For several weeks now, there had been signals, not official statements from the Kremlin, not formal announcements from Russian state media, just signals that Moscow was preparing something unprecedented. Russia has been aggressive, yes, but they have been predictable in their aggression. Their moves have followed a certain logic, a pattern, almost a rhythm. Military analysts in Washington and London had come to understand that rhythm. They could anticipate when Russia would escalate, when they would pull back, and when they would test the boundaries of Western patience. But what set off alarm bells in the Pentagon this week was that the rhythm went silent. Intelligence officials who monitor Russian military communications know the indicators: the surge in encrypted traffic between command centers, the repositioning of strategic assets away from known surveillance zones, the unusual movement of specialized units that only deploy for high-value operations, the sudden radio silence from units that have been communicating regularly for months. All of that went quiet, and whenever Russia goes quiet, it means something is about to get loud. Western intelligence agencies began working around the clock. Satellite imagery was analyzed frame by frame. Communications intercepts were scrutinized for any hint of what Moscow was planning. But Russia had learned. They had adapted. They had become more sophisticated in hiding their intentions, and that sophistication is exactly what made today's attack so devastating and so unexpected. Early this morning, Ukrainian military command detected what they described as an unprecedented concentration of Russian firepower, including missile systems and aerial assets that had not been deployed in this theater in over 18 months. These are the kinds of weapons that Russia only uses when they are signaling something very specific: a major offensive push, a strategic demonstration of force, or a calculated attempt to break Ukrainian morale before winter operations begin. NATO observers didn't know which category this fell into, or whether it fell into all three at once. But what they did know was that Russia was changing its posture. And when a nuclear-armed power shifts its military posture without explanation, even by a small measure, every intelligence agency in the Western world pays attention. The first reports came in at approximately 4:47 a.m. local time. Russian forces had launched a coordinated strike against multiple Ukrainian positions, including civilian infrastructure that had been specifically designated as protected under international humanitarian law. The scale was staggering. The targets were deliberate, and the message was unmistakable. Russia wanted Ukraine and the world to know that they were willing to escalate in ways they had previously avoided. The statement issued by the White House tonight was not normal. It was not routine. It was not symbolic. It was urgent. Official after official described Russia's attack as reckless, destabilizing, and perhaps most importantly, indicative of a shift in Moscow's strategic calculus that could have implications far beyond Ukraine's borders. But intimidation only works if the target hesitates. Ukraine did not. In fact, their response today was among the most aggressive and coordinated we've seen since the conflict began. Here's what we know. Within 4 hours of Russia's initial strike, Ukrainian forces launched a counter-operation that military experts are already calling one of the most impressive tactical responses of this war. These weren't the standard defensive measures we've seen Ukraine employ in the past. These were precision strikes deep into Russian-controlled territory, operations that Ukraine only executes when they are prepared to send a message that cannot be ignored. President Biden was reportedly briefed on the situation within minutes of the first Russian missiles hitting Ukrainian soil. According to sources familiar with the meeting, the president was visibly shaken by the scale of Russia's attack and by the implications of what it might mean for the broader conflict. But Biden's concern was quickly matched by something else: admiration for Ukraine's response, because what Kyiv did today was not the action of a nation on the defensive. It was the action of a nation that refuses to be broken. Tonight, Ukrainian military command confirmed that their forces launched coordinated strikes on Russian positions across multiple fronts, including a logistics hub that had recently been reinforced for what analysts believe was a planned winter offensive. Ukraine struck before Russia could consolidate. They hit ammunition depots that were stockpiling supplies for the coming months. They hit command centers that were coordinating Russian operations across the front. They hit convoy routes that were likely preparing to support a major push. In other words, Ukraine targeted the nervous system of Russia's operational capacity in the region, the infrastructure that would have made their offensive possible. This is what made the White House's warning so urgent. Russia's attack wasn't just symbolic. It was actionable. It represented the kind of escalation that could fundamentally alter the dynamics of this war if left unchecked. And Ukraine, understanding that fully, responded with force, not recklessly, not impulsively, but strategically. They didn't waste resources on symbolic targets. They didn't spread their response thin across irrelevant positions. They hit the logistics, they hit the communications, they hit the exact pressure points that would maximize damage while minimizing exposure. Military analysts speaking with Western media tonight described Ukraine's response as textbook asymmetric warfare, using precision and speed to compensate for Russia's advantages in raw firepower. And it worked. Reports from the ground indicate that Russia's planned follow-up operations have been significantly disrupted. Convoys that were supposed to move have stalled. Communications that were supposed to coordinate have gone dark. And commanders who were supposed to lead are now scrambling to understand what just happened. And here's where the story becomes even more significant. Intelligence analysts now believe that Russia's latest attack was designed to test the resolve of Western support after months of political uncertainty in Washington and European capitals. Moscow wanted to see whether Ukraine would falter without immediate backing. They wanted to see whether the Biden administration would delay its response. They wanted to see whether cracks in the Western alliance would finally begin to show. But instead, the opposite happened. Ukraine didn't wait for permission. They responded with a counterstrike that was so swift, so devastating, that even the Kremlin noticed. You don't get Russia's attention easily, but today Ukraine did. Defense officials speaking with major news outlets under condition of anonymity described Russia's initial attack as a pressure test, a way to gauge how much they could push before facing serious consequences. But Ukraine proved today that they remain both capable and willing to make Russia pay for every escalation. Their strikes were not only effective, they were calibrated so precisely that Russian forces had almost no time to respond. That timing matters because it shows something critical about Ukraine's intelligence capabilities. It shows that Kyiv is not just reacting to Russian moves, they are anticipating them. They are staying one step ahead, and that is something that Russia did not expect. As reports continued coming in throughout the day, we learned more about the scale of Ukraine's response. Ukrainian drone units carried out strikes on at least 12 Russian positions, forcing the evacuation of forward command posts across the Eastern Front. Artillery brigades targeted supply lines that had been reinforced in the last 72 hours, suggesting Ukraine had real-time intelligence on Russian movements. Special operations forces operating behind Russian lines reportedly destroyed communication equipment used by Moscow to coordinate their attacks. This wasn't just retaliation, this wasn't just defense, this was strategic degradation, this was operational disruption. And operational disruption is the one thing Russia has struggled to overcome since the early months of this conflict. For every advance they have made, Ukraine has countered with something that complicates their ability to hold territory and maintain momentum. Today was no different. In fact, today may have been the clearest example yet of Ukraine's ability to turn Russian aggression into Russian vulnerability. Remember, Russia thought this war would be over in weeks. They thought Kyiv would fall within days of the initial invasion. They thought Ukrainian resistance would crumble once the first missiles started flying. They thought the West would lose interest and move on to other concerns. But tonight, the exact opposite is happening. Ukraine is stronger than it was a year ago. Western support, despite political challenges, continues to flow. And Russia is now facing a military situation that is far more complicated than anything they anticipated. The Kremlin's original assumptions have been proven wrong at every turn, and yet they continue to escalate. They continue to push. They continue to believe that one more attack, one more show of force will finally break Ukrainian resistance. But if today proved anything, it's that Ukraine is not going to break. Not now, not ever. What makes this moment so critical and so dangerous is that Russia's latest attack happened at a time when Vladimir Putin is under immense internal pressure. Hardliners in Moscow want a more aggressive approach. Pragmatists want a negotiated settlement that preserves Russian gains. Military commanders want more resources and fewer constraints. Oligarchs want the economic pain to end. Putin is balancing these demands while managing a war that has already cost Russia far more than anyone in the Kremlin anticipated. And when leaders in that position make sudden, dramatic moves, they're not doing it from strength, they're doing it from pressure. They're doing it from vulnerability. Today's attack may have looked like aggression on the surface, but underneath it reveals something else entirely: desperation, a need to show results, a need to demonstrate that Russia is still capable of dictating the terms of this conflict. But Ukraine's response today proved that Russia cannot dictate anything, not anymore. The White House's statement, now circulating through diplomatic channels worldwide, was designed to signal that the United States is not willing to allow Russia's escalation to go unanswered. Officials said plainly that Russia's attack was inconsistent with the principles of international law and the norms of civilized conduct. That is diplomatic language for this crossed a line and there will be consequences. You don't usually hear that tone from the Biden administration unless something serious is at stake. And tonight, something serious is very much at stake: the credibility of Western deterrence, the future of Ukrainian sovereignty, and the stability of the entire European security architecture. All of it hangs in the balance. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky addressed his nation in a defiant, emotional speech tonight. He said, they want us to be afraid. We are not afraid. He said, they want us to surrender. We will never surrender. And he said, for every attack on our people, there will be a response. Not tomorrow, not next week, today. These are not rhetorical flourishes. These are statements from a leader who understands just how high the stakes have become. Zelensky knows that the world is watching. He knows that every response Ukraine makes sends a message not just to Russia, but to every nation wondering whether small countries can stand up to larger aggressors. And tonight his message was clear: they can, they will, and they are. Here's what makes the situation even more concerning. Russia's latest attack wasn't isolated. Along with the primary strikes on Ukrainian positions, Belarusian forces also conducted unusual military exercises near the Ukrainian border. Russian naval assets in the Black Sea increased their operational tempo. Cyber attacks targeting Ukrainian government systems spiked dramatically in the hours before the physical assault. All of this happened within the same 24-hour window. When Russia moves multiple pieces at once, it means something larger is underway. It means they are not just testing Ukraine, they are testing the entire Western response apparatus. And that is why tonight's developments have officials in Washington, London, Brussels, and beyond working through the night. Intelligence analysts are now considering several possibilities. One is that Russia is preparing for a major winter offensive designed to capitalize on the colder months when military operations become more difficult. Another is that Moscow is attempting to create a crisis that forces negotiations on their terms before the political situation in Western capitals shifts against them. A third possibility, the one worrying officials the most, is that Russia is attempting to establish a new baseline of escalation, normalizing attacks that would have been unthinkable just months ago. But today, Ukraine took that card off the table. They didn't wait for Western approval. They didn't hesitate while committees debated. They didn't allow Russia's attack to stand unanswered. They struck back immediately, decisively, and with overwhelming tactical precision. What we're watching now is a test of will. Russia wants to see whether Ukraine's resolve will crack under sustained pressure. Ukraine wants to show that their resistance is unbreakable. The United States wants to prevent the conflict from spiraling into something that draws NATO directly into combat. And Europe wants to prevent a wider war that could destabilize the entire continent. All of these objectives are now colliding in real time, and the decisions made in the coming days will shape the trajectory of this conflict for months, perhaps years, to come. Tonight, we've heard from Pentagon officials who are now monitoring the situation around the clock. They say Russia's attack represents a significant escalation in both scope and intent. They say Ukraine's response was remarkably effective given the circumstances. And they say Russia's decision to target civilian infrastructure is likely part of a broader psychological warfare campaign intended to break Ukrainian morale before winter. But Ukraine is not breaking. In fact, Ukraine is adapting. Their response today, swift, precise, and devastating, sent a message to Russia that escalation will be met with escalation. And it sent a message to the West that Ukraine remains a capable, determined ally worthy of continued support. As the night goes on, we expect more details to emerge about what exactly Russia hoped to achieve with today's attack. But what we do know is that the White House's urgent response was timely. It reinforced American commitment to Ukraine's defense. It signaled to allies that Washington remains engaged, and it warned Russia that further escalation will have consequences. What happens next will depend on what Moscow does in the next 48 to 72 hours. If they de-escalate, this moment will be remembered as a dangerous but contained crisis. If they double down, Ukraine and its Western partners have already shown they are prepared to respond. They have shown they are ready. They have shown they will not back down. And tonight, for the first time in months, Russia appears to be recalculating. The Kremlin is quiet, too quiet. And when Russia is quiet, it means they are thinking. It means they are choosing their next move carefully. Because tonight, Moscow learned something they have learned many times before, but continue to forget. Ukraine will not surrender. The West will not abandon its allies. And aggression will always be met with resistance. This story is far from over. But tonight, one thing is clear. Russia underestimated Ukraine again. President Biden's administration is more engaged than ever, and Ukraine's defenders have proven once more that they are the nightmare Russia never expected. And we will be here watching every detail as the next phase unfolds.